At the edge of a quiet town, beneath the faint glow of a church's stained glass windows, a wedding was about to take place. The bride stood trembling in a faded gown that had been patched too many times to count. Her eyes were red from nights of silent tears, and her hands shook as she clutched a bouquet of wilted daisies she'd picked herself that morning. Around her, whispers filled the room like a cold draft. "Why would she marry a beggar?" someone muttered. "She deserves better than this," another sneered. Every gaze seemed heavy with pity or disgust. At the altar, the groom stood in worn-out shoes, his jacket frayed at the edges. His face looked tired, marked by years of hardship, but his eyes, sharp, steady, and oddly confident, carried a weight no one seemed to notice. Everyone thought this marriage was a curse, a cruel punishment for a girl who had already lost everything. What they didn't know was that the man standing there was hiding a secret that would soon turn their world upside down. A secret powerful enough to silence every whisper in that room. How did it come to this moment? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Emily, a girl who had known the weight of loss long before she ever learned the warmth of love. Her parents had passed when she was just 12, leaving her in the custody of her aunt, a woman whose heart seemed carved from stone. Life in that small suburban neighborhood should have been simple, but for Emily it was a battlefield disguised as a home. Each day she swept floors, washed dishes, and cooked meals she was rarely allowed to share. Her cousins, Jessica and Claire, never missed a chance to remind her of her place, mocking her hand-me-down clothes and laughing at the silence she kept. To them, she wasn't family. She was labor. To her aunt, she was little more than an unwanted burden. Yet, despite the cruelty that shaped her world, Emily remained kind. Neighbors recalled the way she helped carry groceries for the elderly, or how she comforted children at the park when they scraped their knees. Her goodness was the very thing that set her apart, but it was also what made her a target in a home ruled by envy. She dreamed of dignity, of the chance to be loved not for what she could provide, but for who she was, yet every sign pointed to a different fate. Her aunt's schemes had turned her life into something that could be bartered away like a transaction. And soon, that plan would force her into a marriage that seemed designed to strip away the last pieces of her hope. But there was something about the man they mocked, something hidden beneath the rags and weariness, something that not even Emily herself could yet see. Every morning before the sun broke the horizon, Emily was already awake. She scrubbed the kitchen floor on her knees, her hands raw from soap that never seemed to wash away the sting of her aunt's words. She ironed Jessica and Claire's clothes, listening as they giggled in the other room, mocking her for having nothing of her own. "You'll never be more than the help," Jessica sneered one morning as she watched Emily polish her shoes. Emily lowered her eyes, saying nothing, because experience had taught her that silence was safer than fighting back. At the market, neighbors often mistook her for a maid, yet some noticed her quiet strength, the way her smile carried a softness rare in a world hardened by disappointment. More than once, men who had come to court Jessica or Claire shifted their gaze toward Emily, asking quietly about the girl who carried groceries with grace, or the young woman who laughed gently with the children. Each time, her aunt's face twisted with rage. In her eyes, Emily's beauty was not a blessing, it was an offense, a reminder that her own daughters were constantly overlooked. Jealousy spread through that household like smoke filling every corner, and Emily bore the weight of it alone. It was then that her aunt made a decision that would change everything. One evening, after another suitor left the house, impressed not by Jessica or Claire, but by Emily, her aunt slammed the door shut and hissed, "If no one wants my daughters because of you, then you will have nothing. You will marry the first worthless man who will take you, and then we'll see if they still envy you." Days later, she introduced Emily to a stranger, a man with threadbare clothes, weary eyes, and shoes so worn they hardly clung to his feet. The whispers began at once. Is this really the match they chose for her? Even Emily's cousins laughed openly, mocking her fate. To them, it was the perfect punishment. Beauty shackled to poverty, kindness wasted on someone beneath them all. But who was this poor man really? The day the poor man arrived was one Emily would never forget. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood, and by the time he walked up the path to her aunt's house, half the village had already gathered at the gates. His figure was striking for all the wrong reasons. His jacket hung too loose on his shoulders, patched in 3 different places. His shoes were so thin the leather curled at the edges, and every step revealed a slight limp, as though each movement carried pain. In one hand, he carried a small bundle of old clothes tied together with fraying string. The crowd erupted in quiet laughter. Someone whispered, "This is the man they found for her?" Another chuckled, "So this is her prince?" Emily lowered her gaze, cheeks burning, but the taunts only grew louder. Jessica smirked, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I hope you like rags, cousin. They'll suit you both." Claire added, "Don't worry, Emily. Maybe one day he'll buy you a new pair of shoes, if he ever finds a real job." Their mother stood proud, her lips curled into a satisfied smile, as though humiliation itself was part of the bargain she had arranged. The deal was struck that very day. Without asking Emily's heart, without considering her tears, her aunt shook hands with the stranger and declared it done. From that moment on, Emily's fate was sealed, mocked by her family, and pitied by neighbors who whispered behind her back. And yet, as the poor man bowed his head and accepted the ridicule without a word, one detail went unnoticed by all except perhaps the careful observer. His hands, though his clothes were worn and his shoes falling apart, were clean. His nails were trimmed, neat, and without the roughness of a man beaten down by poverty. It was as if his body told one story, but his hands whispered another. And that small detail, overlooked by everyone that day, would later become the thread that unraveled the truth. Because the man standing there was not who they thought he was. The truth was darker than anyone expected. In the weeks that followed the wedding, Emily's heart grew heavier with each passing day. She moved through her new life as though carrying an invisible weight, convinced her aunt had finally succeeded in stripping her of every dream she had ever clung to. The whispers in the village did not stop. If anything, they grew louder. When she fetched water, women turned their heads and muttered, "Poor girl, she deserved better." When she walked past the market, children pointed at her husband's tattered clothes, laughing openly at the sight. And yet, in the quiet spaces between humiliation, Emily began to notice something she could not explain. One evening, as they walked home from the market, her husband paused to give his last coin to a beggar shivering in the cold. The man thanked him, and for a brief moment Emily saw warmth in his eyes, a kindness too steady to belong to someone defeated by life. Another time, when neighbors argued loudly about a piece of land, her husband spoke just one sentence, measured, calm, commanding, and suddenly the crowd grew silent, listening as though he had authority they could not ignore. At night, when they sat together in their small room, he sometimes spoke of life with a wisdom that startled her, as though he had lived through struggles far greater than what his appearance suggested. Slowly, confusion began to chip away at the hopelessness inside her. Who exactly had she married? And then came the most unsettling discovery of all. Several nights each week, when the village lay quiet and the stars filled the sky, Emily awoke to find him gone. She would wait, anxious, staring at the door until he returned just before dawn, his clothes faintly dusty, but his expression unreadable. Villagers began to whisper. Some claimed he was stealing in the night. Others said he wandered to the next town searching for scraps of work. But Emily's instincts told her otherwise. Where did he go? What was he hiding? What would you do if your family forced you into a marriage like this? Tell us in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts. One cold evening, Emily's restlessness grew too heavy to ignore. Her husband had slipped out again under the cover of night, and something inside her told her she could no longer remain still, waiting for his return. Quietly, She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him from a safe distance. Her heart pounded as she trailed him through winding dirt paths, across the sleeping village, and all the way toward the city lights that glimmered faintly in the distance. Every step was a battle between fear and curiosity, but she pressed on. When he reached the outskirts of the city, Emily froze in disbelief. Before her stood an iron gate, taller than any she had ever seen, guarding a mansion that looked as though it had been pulled from a dream. To her shock, the guards at the gate immediately bowed their heads and opened the way without question. She crept closer, her breath catching in her throat as she watched her husband walk confidently inside. Servants rushed to greet him, speaking his name with reverence. Inside the brightly lit hall, men in fine suits stood at attention, awaiting his orders. It was a world Emily had never imagined, a life hidden behind layers of rags and secrecy. The man her family mocked as a beggar was no beggar at all. He was a man of wealth and power, one who commanded respect wherever he went. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched her shawl. Her mind raced with questions that had no easy answers. Why would a man of such fortune disguise himself as a pauper? Why would he accept humiliation when he clearly had the means to silence every whisper? In that instant, the truth became undeniable. Her husband was testing something far greater than appearances. But what did he want to prove? Loyalty, love, or something else entirely? Emily's lips pressed together, and though every part of her wanted to confront him, she chose silence. She would carry this secret for now, waiting for the right moment to speak. Because from that moment, everything changed. But not in the way she expected. If you're still here, drop a comment saying, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's with us to this point. The days that followed were a cruel reminder of the place Emily still held in her family's eyes. Her aunt continued to bark orders, treating her less like a niece and more like a servant bound by shame. Her cousins, emboldened by their mother's bitterness, never missed a chance to mock her husband's tattered clothes and weary stride. "Look at him," one cousin laughed in front of neighbors, "a man who can barely feed himself, yet she calls him husband." The sting of those words pierced Emily's heart, though she carried her secret like a fragile flame no one else could see. And then came the irony fate had prepared. One by one, the wealthy men who once courted her cousins began returning to the village. They passed by Emily's small home, their eyes lingering longer than before, their voices softer, regretful. Whispers spread quickly. She was the one worth choosing all along, not them. The cousins, once filled with pride, now watched in silent envy as attention turned toward the very woman they tried to destroy. Emily herself said nothing, but her husband, quiet as ever, began to drop hints no one seemed to understand. When others mocked his shabby shoes, he answered with calm words that carried unusual weight. When a villager asked how he could endure such shame, he replied, "A man's worth is not in what he wears, but in what he carries within." His tone was steady, measured, almost regal. But the cruelest humiliation came one afternoon in the market. Emily had gone to buy food, her husband by her side, when her aunt and cousins confronted her before the entire village. "You should bow your head in shame," her aunt sneered. "Married to a beggar, dragging our family's name through the dirt." Laughter rippled through the crowd as villagers pointed and mocked. Emily lowered her gaze, but before she could retreat, her husband straightened his shoulders. His voice rose, not loud, but strong enough to silence the jeers. "You mock what you do not understand," he said, his eyes sharp, his presence suddenly commanding. The crowd grew still. "You see only rags, but you fail to see the man who wears them. Respect is not given by cloth or coin. It is earned by truth." Gasps broke through the silence. Something in his words, in the certainty of his tone, unsettled everyone who heard it. Emily's aunt faltered, her cruel smile wavering for the first time. The cousins shifted uneasily, unable to laugh as they once did. And though he revealed only a glimpse of the truth, it was enough to shake the arrogance that had chained them for years. But the final reveal would silence them all. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than anyone expected. The village had gathered for a celebration, a wedding reception hosted by one of the wealthier families nearby. Emily and her husband were there, as usual, sitting quietly at the back, their presence once again drawing whispers and ridicule. Her aunt and cousins, dressed in their finest clothes, flaunted themselves proudly, sneering at Emily as though nothing had changed. The air was thick with judgment, the same bitter stares Emily had endured for years, but this time, something was different. As the evening unfolded, the sound of engines roared in the distance. Heads turned as a sleek black car, unlike anything the village had ever seen, rolled to a stop at the edge of the gathering. Moments later, more vehicles followed, their doors opening to reveal suited men and women who moved with precision and respect. Murmurs spread through the crowd like wildfire. And then, before their stunned eyes, the man they mocked, the so-called beggar, rose from his seat, removing the worn jacket that had long disguised him. The staff bowed as he approached, addressing him with titles no one could comprehend. Cameras flashed as journalists pushed forward, eager to capture the moment. Villagers gasped, some covering their mouths in shock, others stumbling back as if struck by lightning. Emily's aunt clutched her chest, her knees trembling before she collapsed onto a chair, too overwhelmed to speak. Her cousins stood frozen, mouths agape, every trace of arrogance stripped away in an instant. The man turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the silent crowd, before resting on Emily. His voice carried steady and clear. "I wore these rags because I wanted to find a wife who loved me for my heart, not for my wealth. I wanted to know who would stand beside me when the world turned away." His words cut through the air, heavy with truth. Emily's eyes filled with tears, not from shame, but from the weight of a vindication she had never thought possible. For the first time, respect filled the eyes of those who once mocked her. She was no longer the orphan girl forced into marriage. She was the chosen wife of a man whose power had shaken them all, and in that moment, the tide turned forever. Silence held the village in its grip long after his words had faded. The same people who once mocked Emily now looked upon her with awe, their laughter replaced with shame. Her aunt, trembling and pale, tried to speak, but no words came. The cousins, who had boasted of suitors and mocked her marriage, now hid their faces, powerless before the truth. Yet when all eyes turned to the man they thought was a beggar, his expression was calm. With measured grace, he addressed them again. "I hold no anger toward you. Hatred only destroys the one who carries it. But know this, I will not reward cruelty, nor will I forget how you treated the woman who is now my wife." His words were firm, not harsh, a judgment wrapped in mercy. And with that, the matter was settled. Emily stood at his side, no longer a servant to scorn, but a queen in the eyes of all who had once trampled her spirit. She had been broken down, humiliated, forced into a marriage meant as punishment, yet she emerged honored, loved, and exalted. Sometimes, life hides blessings in disguise. What looks like a curse may be the very path to destiny. And sometimes, the very people who seek to destroy you only push you toward the future that was meant for you all along. What do you think? Did she truly win in the end, or was it fate playing its hand? Let us know in the comments. And if this story hit you like it did us, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping stories every day.